Magic the Gathering's newest set, Aetherdrift, is just around the corner. Will any of the commons released in this set make it into the Pauper format? Well, let's take a look at the top 5 cards I think might see some play, along with some honorable mentions. Coming in at number 5 on the list is Ride's End. This is a 4 colorless, 1 white pip instant that says this spell costs 3 colorless less to cast if it targets a tapped permanent. Exile target creature or vehicle. So, while 5 cost for a removal spell is not great, especially in the Pauper format, if it reduces itself by 3, especially if they're swinging with something big, you are not just killing it like with a cast down, but this is a white removal spell that exiles the creature. This is pretty good in my opinion, especially if you're facing off some cheap big creatures. Like mono blue terror, they're going to have those big snakes coming at you quickly. You can exile them if you're placing off like Exhume decks. You can get rid of those big creatures coming at you. Anything like this, and it's exiling, so it's not going to the graveyard. So if you have anything you need to get rid of, you don't want things to come back, this is a possibility. Will it be a better option than other removal spells? I'm not quite sure yet, but it seems like it might be interesting. We'll see if it comes into the format or not. Number 4 on our list is Packdoll Terror. This artifact creature is a 3/4 that costs 3 colorless and 1 black pip. And it says whenever this creature or another artifact you control enters, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, the 4 cost of this spell is keeping it a little bit higher on the list for me, but the ability is wonderful, especially for someone who likes affinity like me, who plays a lot of artifacts and decks. This thing is very intriguing, and it's a 3/4. That 4 toughness keeps it out of bolt range, which I like a lot. I'm wondering if we can get this out a little bit earlier, especially if we're going to make some treasures on turn 2 or 3. You can play this on turn 3 perhaps. You can see a Deadly Dispute on turn 2, making a treasure, dropping another land, being able to play this early, and then dropping some really cheap or free artifacts in the turns to come. Especially if you have anything with affinity, you can play them for basically free. Every time an artifact enters, it's not only going to hurt your opponent, but it's going to gain you life. I liked Reckless Fire Weaver for the reason of being able to burn your opponent every time you play an artifact, but this is even better. It does cost more, but again, we'll see if people are able to get this out earlier. I have a couple of deck ideas that have this in mind, so I'm wondering if I can brew something together and I'll make a video about it, and we'll just see how dangerous Packdoll Terror is going forward. Number 3 on our list is Spectral Interference. This is a new counter spell. It is an instant for a colorless and a blue, and it says counter target artifact or creature spell unless its controller pays 4. So I can see this being in a lot of sideboards. You might mainboard it in some cases, but with affinity being such a big part of the current meta and other artifact decks as well, this is a good sideboard option. Because we already have a null, but this is also going to hit other creatures. So if you're running against a creature-heavy deck, this may also go into it too. Paying an extra 4 for something is harsh. So I can see a lot of blue decks possibly running this as an additional counter spell in their counter magic weaponry that they've got. So we'll see if this ends up taking place. I don't think it's going to overlap a null too much, like it's going to overtake it, but it might find its way in, especially since it doesn't just hit artifacts, it's hitting creatures too. Coming in at number 2 is Grim Bauble. This is another artifact, 1 black to play this. When this artifact enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. But it also has 2 colorless and a black pip. You can tap it, sack it, and you get to surveil for 2. Now this thing already is great in Pauper. It's going to hit the field, which is going to be an artifact possibly for affinity. It is going to possibly do some triggers like with Packdoll or Reckless Fireweaver, or even in my decks, I like to run Glaze Fiend, things like that. This is going to be an artifact trigger for any of those kinds of cards, but additionally, this is going to be removal. So I can see this easily slotting into some affinity decks, but even more so going into like a Glint Blade deck where they're going to have a lot of opportunity to put this back in their hand like they're doing with Tithing Blade already. This is going to just be more removal. Plus you're surveilling, you get to look at the top of your deck, so if you want to put anything into the graveyard too, this is just going forward with it. I can see this kind of comboing perhaps a little bit with the new Chitin Gravestalker that we might talk about later. I can see how this might go along with it being able to surveil. It's also a target for Deadly Dispute. All of these things, it's cheap, it's removal, you can put it back in your hand with other cards. This just seems like a great card to go in Affinity or Glintblade. Coming in at number 1 is Magmakin Artillerist. This is a 1/4 for 2 colorless and a red pip. It says whenever you discard 1 or more cards, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent. And it has cycling for a colorless and a red. And when you cycle this card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. This thing just does everything. He's a 1/4, so he's got a big back end. He's not going to be removed pretty easily with burn. Plus, this is going to go immediately into like Cycle Storm decks. They've already got stingers that do some damage, but this is going to do even more. I think it's just going to go slot in very easily. Additionally, I think we're going to end up having some different versions of Madness. I've been running through a couple iterations of Madness, Rakdos Madness, and this deck with this card would be just bonkers. I think this is going to fit in. This is going to do a ton of damage. It also discards itself, so you can draw a card and it deals damage even while you're drawing the card. This is just good all around. I'm looking forward to seeing this and playing this card. Let me know what you guys think about this top 5. Let me know if you disagree, if there's others you would add, but stick around. I've got some honorable mentions as well. While these honorable mentions are in no particular order, I do think this first one, Chitin Gravestalker, could have easily fitted into my top 5, maybe even taking the place of something like the white instant removal spell. But this one, what this is, it's a 5/4 for 6, 5 colorless and 1 black pip. And this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. Plus it has cycling for 2 colorless. And that makes sense going along with there's a cycling theme in this set. But what's interesting is this is going to reduce its cost. So I'm looking at things like Tolarian Terror and Cryptic Serpent and all these big creatures you can play for reduced costs are practically free. This is easily going to go into graveyard decks where you can play a 5/4 for 1 black. And I've already started building a deck with this as well. And again, it's cycling, so even if you can't play it, you can draw a card. This just seems so good. This just seems so good. So maybe this video should be top 6 with this slotted somewhere in there. But I'm already loving this card more and more every time I think about it. Next on honorable mentions is Stampeding Scurryfoot. I just like this card. I don't know if it's going to be great. It's a 1/1 for 1 green, but it has Exhaust. That's the ability you can only use 1 time in the game. It's new to Aetherdrift, but it's 3 colors and a green. You put a 1/1 plus a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and then you can create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. I like anything that does multiple abilities or produces more than 1 creature. Next is Interface Ace. This is a 0/4 artifact creature for a colorless and a white. This creature saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles using its toughness rather than its power. Whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this is going to go well with the current theme of vehicles and mounts because you're going to be able to use it basically for 4 power because that's its toughness. And if you pump it at all, pump its toughness at all, it could crew or saddle larger things. Probably doesn't need to do that as much. I looked through all the mounts and vehicles that are currently legal in Pauper and some that are coming in. There might be a few that I'd be interested in trying, but currently it just doesn't seem as viable. But the thing that I'm interested in more is the second ability because this is going to untap itself. So anything that's going to benefit from tapping it. So I'm thinking of Convoke spells. This is going to tap and untap itself. You might be able to cast something else with it. If you have any abilities that say tap this to activate, you can do that more than once each turn. I'm thinking there's going to be some sneaky niche plays or abilities that people are going to build this around. Next is the Light Wheel Enhancements. This is a 1 white enchantment aura. It enchants a creature or a vehicle, and it has Start Your Engines. This is another one of the new mechanics from Aetherdrift. It says if you have no speed, it starts at 1, and then it increases once on each of your turns when an opponent loses life. Max speed is 4. And the enchanted permanent gets +1/+1 and vigilance. And if you have max speed, you may cast this card from your graveyard. Now, this interests me because anything I can play more than once, it's also cheap, but anything I can play more than once is exciting to me. because I play enchantment decks. I play things that I want to get them back out of the graveyard. So if I can get this Start Your Engines max speed, I can play a 1-cost enchantment repeatedly. So maybe I can sack it and get some more effects. There's a lot of good enchantment triggers from Duskmourn and Wilds of the Eldraine and things like that, where this might be interesting. Again, more niche, that's why it's honorable mentions, but it is intriguing. So I'm wondering where this could go. I've got a couple of ideas. Last up for the honorable mentions is Mutant Surveyor, or really any of the Surveyors, because we're looking at that ability at the bottom, which says max speed, 3 colorless, exile this card from your graveyard, draw a card. I like the Mutant Surveyor out of them, but you could argue for another one is better than this one. This is a 2/3 for 2 colorless and a black, but it has Start Your Engines. So I think there's a Pauper deck out there where you could run Start Your Engines, and this would be pretty exciting. So it also pumps itself. This one for 2 colorless, it's going to get bigger, which is always good, and it's not too expensive to pump. But you have max speed, so I'm thinking if you are already playing this creature, it's gone to the graveyard, or you're playing a graveyard deck where you're wanting to put creatures into your graveyard, having another option mid to late game to draw a card and it's out of your graveyard, this is interesting to me. This is really good. I'm thinking if you can mill it into your graveyard, sack creatures into your graveyard, and then exile this to get later card advantage, this could be pretty sneaky, a good way to get some extra card advantage, and I like that. So, not quite sure it's why it's at the bottom, but we will see. Again, always brewing, always thinking of fun new decks, ways to twist the meta or make decks that no one's expecting, and that's why I love Pauper. That's why we love it. So, we'll see if Aetherdrift is really going to affect the meta at all, or if there's going to be some new decks that are going to shock everyone, or pump some current decks that we already have. We will see. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Again, my name is Josh, and thanks for just popping by.